All right, let's talk about opening now. So we've got our clay centered, and we went through a lot to get there. Good job. We're going to talk about what to do at the next stage. So the first thing we need to do is find the little sweet spot in the middle. And why we go through all this centering and trying to find the perfect center in the middle is that if your pot, if your hole is off center, your pot's off center, you're going to have one side that's thicker than the other, and that's going to lead to a very wonky, undesirable pot. So we're going to find that little sweet spot in the middle. So you can take your sponge or your finger kind of a little bit off to the side and just walk your finger up to the center and find that little sweet spot, okay? And if you just want to make like a little divot. If you find a perfect sweet spot, sometimes it's really cool because it makes you feel like it's going to suck your finger down into the vortex, which is really cool. So once you have a little divot there, now everybody opens slightly differently. So I've seen, production technique often just uses their thumb and pushes that in. I don't, because I find that only works for small pieces, and I like to do big pots. So, I like to use a technique that will work no matter what. So this is what I do. So I just take 2 or 3 fingers and flatten them off like this. And that's my left hand. And just think of it as a stick. This hand is not doing anything. It's not relaxed, but it's rigid. It's just, hello. Oh, that's funny. Just a stick. It's just sitting there just to entertain you a little. And so what I'm going to do is push down on the back of my hand to kind of push this stick down into the bottom. So I'll show you a little trick. When you're pushing your hands through, you're going to end up your fingers are going to hit all the fresh clay that's inside that. And if it's not lubricated, it's going to twist and you're going to get chunks that peel off, and it's going to maybe potentially make that hole not centered. And you can kind of go back and forth to the water. But I've learned this trick over the years. I just take a damp sponge, put it on the top of my hand. Oh, now it's like a hat. And then you press down on the back of your hand. If you need a little water, you can just squeeze the sponge. It goes down your fingers into the hole. But really the pressure is on the back of my hand here. And of course I've got my elbows down, and I'm just going to go down. Okay. Now, if you go all the way down, you end up with a hole in the bottom of your pot. So you have to stop a little short. And I'm going to check the bottom to see how deep it is on my pin tool. There you go. So right now I've got water in the bottom. So what I'm going to do is just take my sponge and suck it out. So while the wheel's turning to get the water out, all you do is just shove the sponge in, and it'll kind of absorb the water in there. So this is one of the things that I do while the wheel stopped. Almost everything you do to your pot is when the wheel's going, but this will carve up your bottom. So I just take my pin tool. So this is not a cake. I'm not trying to check if it's done. I'm using it to measure. So I've got the tool stuck in the bottom, and I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to go right down as far as I can reach down to the bottom. And then I'm going to hold my finger against the tool and then slowly pull it out. So that tells me how thick the bottom is. So when you first start, I would say 1 centimeter or 1/4 inch is perfectly fine of depth from the bottom to start with. As you get going, you find you can leave 1 inch. That's an aesthetic choice that you're going to make, whether you want a flat bottom on your finished pot or you want a beautiful tall pedestal. That's a choice. So when you first start, you're just trying to make anything, so you don't really have a clue what the next stages are going to be. I would just kind of plan on about 1 centimeter or 1/4 inch in depth. So now I know I can go down a little bit more. It's better to go down a little bit more than to all of a sudden, go all the way down. Now, I can show you though, if you do have an accident and go all the way down, let me grab some clay. So if you accidentally go all the way down, this is not ideal, but it's just a fix. You just take a nice dry ball of clay. I'm going to dry my hands off because it's wet. And I'm just going to make a little ball. Okay. And the inside here, I've dried that off as well with a sponge. And I'm just going to do this, bloop, and put the little ball in there. And then I'm going to take my sponge and finger and I'm going to compress that ball into the floor. It's not perfect. It's not as strong, but it will do in a pinch if you're desperate and you've made and you don't want to make a plant pot drain hole. It's not ideal, but it happens. It happens. So now we have our hole in the bottom, and we want to. We essentially have a pot. It will contain things, but it's really quite narrow in there. So now we want to make the floor of the pot. And it'd be lovely if we had a see-through pot, but we don't. So I'm going to pretend that this is the floor. I don't know if you can kind of see there. So pretend this is the floor of the pot. This is the wall. So when I'm opening, and what I want to do is push the wall back. Okay. I'm going to push the wall back, but I don't want to push down into the soft floor because then I'm going to make a plant pot again. I'm going to make holes. So I'm going to curl the tips of my fingers on the inside, and I'm just going to kind of skirt the back of my fingers along the floor. So I'm not pushing down, and I'm pushing backward towards my belly button, and I'm going to push that wall back, and that's going to open the pot. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I always put my left hand inside. I learned to have, when I first started, with my right hand on the outside, and I kind of brace myself and pull back. I find that was just too awkward for me, so I'm going to show you my method. So I typically get my fingernails and my fingers just jammed into the bottom. So I cover my fingertips with my sponge, and I just shove the whole sponge in. And then what I'll do, this is my left hand, so my right hand, I'll hold the back of my hand like this, and it's kind of like the Heimlich maneuver. You're kind of going in under the ribs, so right in the crook between where the wall meets the floor, and you're going to pull up, okay? So I'm going to curl the tips of my fingers and pull, and so you can do this at about medium speed. You don't have to go pedal to the metal death speed. And if you're pulling and nothing is happening, just curl the tips of your fingers a little bit, and it should just open up for you really easily. Okay. So what I'm doing is just pulling that wall back. So I have to stop before the sides fall off the floor and I end up with a donut. So I'll show you what that kind of starts to look like. See how I pull this? If I go too far, this kind of overhangs the width of the ball. If I keep going, then this is going to just end up coming apart, separate from the floor, and I'll have a big ring in my hand. So that's a really common issue. So if you open a little bit too far, and you catch it, you can just kind of squeeze it back in. So it's kind of like going back to coning, where you're just kind of got your hands on the outside and you're just squeezing it back in. So what I would recommend is, after you open your floor, check your floor. So that little pin tool that I put into the bottom, you would think it would make a hole, and it does, but it's such a fine hole that when we go to compress our floor, it just disappears. So after you check it and you do that, don't put a pinhole in after the fact. I've seen people try to do it to leather hard pots to measure, or a finished pot afterward. That's going to make a hole. So just do it at that beginning stages to measure, and then after you open it, what we're going to do is compress that bottom on the floor, and that'll get rid of that hole. And also make your bottom nice and strong. So I just take two hands like this, and I never do anything with just one hand loosey-goosey. I'm always braced with things. So I've got my elbows down, and this hand is bracing this hand so that it can really stay rigid. I don't want a relaxed thing. So when I'm rigid. You know, if somebody pushed my hand, it's not going to move. It's not going to go flying. It's fixed in place. So I'm going to push with my sponge on the floor and then slide my hands back. And what that does is it just kind of, what I'm trying to do is smooth out the floor and compress it and make sure it's nice and strong and pretty. Because once I get this pot up, I won't be able to get in there. So this is the time to do the floor. So what I'm going to try to do is just prepare this for the throwing stage, for when we make a pot nice and tall. So I've got it opened now. It's essentially a pot. It's a little chunky, but I want to make, this is going to be a tall pot. So I'm going to, after you open, fix your bottom, and then you want to bring your clay, color it in to make it look like a volcano. So you want that top to be narrower than the base. And why I say that is that centrifugal force of the wheel is going to want to make things just to open up. Like I could just put this on high speed, go for a walk, come back, and that's going to widen, and then it's going to collapse and it won't be pretty. So our natural tendency is to make bowls. It seems like everybody's natural tendencies when they're pulling the walls up is to kind of lean outward. And between that and the centrifugal force, it's really hard to make a tall, skinny cylinder for a nice coffee mug or whatever. And you want to think about making, the first form that you should really concentrate on is a cylinder. I know it doesn't sound exciting, but you got to get that beautiful coffee mug. That's the goal for a while. If you try to do bowls too early, I find that people have a really hard time reining that clay back in and ever making a taller cylinder. So if you want your goal, you're going to make bowls trying to make cylinders, and that's fine, but just don't make that a goal. Make your goal for the first little while to make tall, skinny forms. So this, to counteract that centrifugal force of things going out wide into a bowl, I'm going to wet the outside here, and I put my hands on the outside, and I'm going to, this is called collaring. I'm just going to squeeze in with my whole hand. Okay, so this is basically pulling in the bottom and then bringing your hands up. And this will also help recenter your clay if you've knocked it off center. You can also wrap your hand, this is called a claw grip, and you can wrap your hand along the top and just push down a little bit and just kind of squeeze if this is a little off center, just to get this background again if there's any issues with that. So I've got my little volcano, and that will help. I'm just going to wipe my puddles. So this is a habit thing, wiping all the puddles off the bottom. And they don't look that menacing, puddles on the bottom of your pot, but what that will do is it will weaken all your clay, and you won't notice it until you get back from the kiln, but it will have a big crack on the bottom. So wipe the puddles. And now I'm all ready for pulling.